Mr. Martin, I know you're a fan of market incentives and using the markets to achieve ends. And in fact, you did a fair amount of work that's related to sustainability in that area. And you want to encourage things like clean energy and discourage things like pollution. What were you thinking, and what are the things that you did when you tried to use the markets to achieve good?
Oh, you're really talking about the environmental indicators. When I was the Minister of Finance, I commissioned work on environmental indicators through the Roundtable, and I did that because for a number of reasons. One, if you're going to have indicators, economic indicators, then they should reflect they should reflect the truth, and the truth certainly is declining natural capital. And if you don't do that, then you end up with huge costs down the road. I mentioned Africa earlier. I spend a lot of time in Africa. If there's any place where you can see the effects of climate change, it is in the drought and the flooding that alternately is hitting different parts of that continent, and the phenomenal costs and the terrible effect on the lives of people. That's a human tragedy. That's a natural tragedy. It's also a huge economic tragedy. It's devastating vast sectors of the agricultural industry, for instance, on that continent. So let me step back. You're the Minister of Finance. Your life is governed by debt to GDP ratios. Your life is governed by economic growth, and as it is measured. Your life is governed by monthly statistics on unemployment. All of these issues, none of those take into account the effect on natural capital, and you know that effect on natural capital is going to have a huge economic effect. And you know that if in fact what you're doing is sound, and yet you're taking that into account, you're going to have a much stronger economy. And you know that if you don't, then you're going to pay through the nose. And none of our indicators showed that. I was very influenced at a very early age by Amory Lovins. And so, I think we all understand what he argued for. And so my goal was essentially to say, look, we've got to develop a new set of economic indicators. Those economic indicators have got to take into account the effect on natural capital. Now, that's important for me, let's say, as an economic observer, because that's the only thing that reflects the truth. But there's something else in that. We eliminated the deficit, and one of the reasons that we succeeded is we set out targets. We said the deficit is very, very high. Now, this is how much we're going to reduce it the first year, how much the second year, and you can follow us. And the reasons that Canadians got behind us on the elimination of the deficit is that every year we beat those targets, but they followed those targets. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, public policy follows measurement. People follow measurement. And if you can't measure it, it doesn't count. Now, you may say, look, that's pretty foolish, but that happens to be a reality. But if you can measure it, then it does count. And so if you want to make the environment a major factor, not simply, something that people talk about occasionally, but if you want policy to follow it, if you want people to follow it, then you've got to be able to measure it. And that's the whole purpose in doing the environmental indicators, and I felt it was very, very important. I really wish that others had continued with the work after I left.
Well, Mr. Martin, some very interesting work was done because of that support. You also did some other things that were quite interesting, and I learned in the last few days through talking to another gentleman, I believe I was talking to Gord Lambert at Suncor in Calgary, that you also were responsible for another initiative that was quite important. It was called the Wind Power Production Incentive, and I believe that was 2001. What was that all about?
Well, I was in Copenhagen not long ago. I think a lot of people were. And one of the things that I did was to retrace some steps that I had taken a number of years earlier and just taken a look at what they have done in terms of wind power. And that I was in Germany and I've seen the manufacturing that is going on. There's a tremendous economic opportunity here. And I really felt it was very important that Canada take advantage of it. obviously, the main goal of doing it is to give us alternative sources of energy. But, you know, economies are changing, and if you need alternative sources of energy, you should develop them. That just, you begin with that. But why not be among the world's leaders? Why not be the people who are not only taking advantage of what is an environmental issue, but is also a tremendous economic opportunity? And this goes back to this question about indicators. I do not believe that a sound environmentalist and a sound economist can differ.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Martin, last question. What do you see as the most important sustainability issue going into the future? What is the thing that you and us and everyone needs to work on together right now?
Well, look, there are so many issues. I mean, climate change in many ways tends to dwarf them. But I'm going to go back, and I guess my answer will surprise you, but I'm going to go back to the environmental indicators. Like it or not, we measure, and policy is made by measurement. The constant focus on the gross domestic product is an example of that thing. So the real issue is there are a wide range of environmental issues out there. Some very big, like climate change. Others are perhaps smaller. Many of them are local. My view is that if public policy can measure it, and if public policy can lay in front of Canadians or lay in front of the world the results of that measurement, so you can either judge progress or the lack of progress, that is the way you will get the greatest amount of change. I think my own view is that will also, by the way, that ability to measure and then that ability to have confidence in that measurement will really make people act. I mean, just think, I'll go back to it. Take a look at the Eurozone crisis, the crisis going on right now. Everything you see is measured. Everything that, they're measuring the inability to roll over X amount of debt. They're doing it within how much debt can you roll over within what period of time. They're measuring debt to GDP. They're measuring deficit. All of that. That's what's caused the huge amount of pressure, because all of a sudden people are projecting 3 months and 3 years ahead of time, and they're saying, my God, we've got to deal with this. Just think in terms of climate change or any other environmental issue that you want. Just think if those kinds of measurements were front and center in the environment the way they are in finance. I think we'd be a lot further ahead than we are now.
Mr. Martin, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and thank you. And thank Pembina.
Thank you.
Okay.